Hey, folks, for episode 38, we had on John Melia, the owner of Contender Equipment Rentals and also the founder of the Wounded Warrior Project, which has raised over $1 billion for injured veterans. Really awesome episode. One of my personal favorites, hearing his story growing up in the military. He was part of a helicopter crash that led him to starting the Wounded Warrior Project, which has raised over $1 billion for wounded veterans. And now, in the last few years, he started Contender Equipment Rental and running a rental business out of Houston, Texas, focused on the rent to own process and just building great customer experiences. So one of my personal favorites, just from talking to him about his background in the military, starting Wounded Warrior Project and now getting into rental in the last few years. So great episode. Hope you guys enjoy. All right, John Melia, welcome to the Rental Roundtable. Got to see you in person last week. Thanks for coming on the podcast this week.
Yeah, Kyle, thank you so much for having me on. It was overwhelming at ARA, but it's great to see you.
Yeah, definitely. I was having about 5 cups of coffee and it was like living on adrenaline. It was awesome. And I got home Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I'm like, I shouldn't be drinking 5 cups of coffee. And I've now recalibrated, but it was a little bit of a caffeine hangover, I guess, from the show.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. It was great seeing you. I'd never met you before. We were at the booth and obviously you're a Quipli user and we were talking about that. But, we talked probably 45 minutes and you have an awesome story outside of the rental side, which we'll get to. Founder of Wounded Warrior Project, which is awesome. And you got a military background. And I felt very honored as a small business owner myself to know that the founder of Wounded Warrior Project was using Quipli. That was sort of a cool moment for me because I grew up, with my dad in the military and knew all about what you had been building there. So, that was a little win, a little highlight for me personally. But so John, I'd love to just kind of walk me through your background. You've had a lot of experience, obviously, on the rental side of things, which is where you are today, but you didn't grow up necessarily in rental. You have a military background. Tell me about your journey to how we got here today.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. It's kind of when you get a couple of years under your belt, it's kind of a long and winding story, but I'll try to keep it, keep the train on the rails. I grew up in New England. I grew up in a little town called Seekonk, Massachusetts, right on the Rhode Island and Massachusetts border. My dad was Vietnam era veteran, and I remember during the Vietnam War, we lived at West Point, where your dad went to school. We were there.
That's right.
1968, 1969. And, after the war, my dad went back to Seekonk, Massachusetts, where I grew up and went to high school, and he worked actually in the grocery business. And then when I was 18 years old, he got recalled to active duty. I spent my senior year in Mass and then joined him in Reston, Virginia. He was in that D.C. area working for the Army. And by then he had gone from being a private to being a lieutenant colonel. So I watched my dad's kind of journey in the military. I come from a military family. Both of my brothers became military officers. My brother Jim was an Army officer. My brother Matt was an Army officer. So military service was not encouraged, but I think in a way it was almost expected. It was something that you did. And we're kind of second generation. My grandparents are, I have one grandmother who was from Syria and the rest of my family's Irish. So we're second generation, and grateful for all the gifts that America has given us. And we just felt like as a family, that's how back in the 80s, that's kind of, if you came from a working class family, the way you went to college is by, doing well in school and going in the military. And I went to Towson University in Baltimore. Actually got commissioned in the Army National Guard. I was an Army officer before I was a Marine. And then the Gulf War started, and I had gotten out of the Army. I had done my commitment, and I tried to get back in during the first Gulf War, and they wouldn't let me back in. They said, hey, we don't need you right now. We got plenty of officers. So my second brother, Jim, was going to Iraq, and I said, he's not going without me. I'm going to enlist. And so I enlisted in the Marine Corps. And so that's how I got in the Marine Corps. Anyway.
Yeah, that's awesome. And obviously the West Point connection, my dad went to West Point, and I've been up there. Did you ever go to any Army football games at Mikey Stadium?
Matter of fact, I think the first play, I have pictures. There's slides. It goes back to when there were slides. I have a picture in Mikey Stadium from when I was a little boy, and sitting on the cannon up at West Point. And there's some pictures of me.
It's one of the best plays. It's obviously not a college football powerhouse like it was in the 40s. They won back-to-back championships in like 44, 45. And I think they had, at that time period, you could probably get whoever they wanted. But being on the Hudson River in the fall, there's like not a better setting in college football, I think. It's amazing.
Yeah, I've been up there tailgating in the A-Lot. That's the big
Yeah.
place where all the West Pointers stand. So
Yeah.
I've actually been up there. It's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland, right? So Towson, our high school graduation was actually at Towson. So that's probably 20 minutes from where I grew up in the Baltimore
Yeah.
area. So yeah, you're military, Army, going to Marines. What happens next, right? Because at some point, early 2000s, you get to the Wounded Warriors. Tell me about what the
Yeah.
next journey
Yeah.
was.
So I was in the Marines from 91 to early 96. I was Marine Corps infantryman. I was in Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, as a regular infantryman, and I got there just as the war ended. So I never made it. But as soon as I got to my unit, we were training up to go back to Kuwait and to Iraq and to be a show force in that part of the world. So we went on what the Marines call and the Navy call Westpac. And while I was out there, we got diverted from Jabail to Somalia. Things were heating up in Somalia in 1992, and so the unit that I was in was training to evacuate Americans from the embassy in Somalia, and we had other Americans there as well. And went out on a mission, fast roping onto a ship. Fast roping's kind of like gliding down a fire pole, but with a rope from 45 to 90 feet above a ship platform, and we were practicing evacuating, an embassy. And so first time it went really, really well. We flew out and came back to the ship, dropped ropes, and I went down. And the second time it didn't go as well. We went several miles away from the ship and we were turning to come back. And the helicopter that I was in had a massive mechanical malfunction and actually exploded in the air. And, as a result of that, I was injured. 4 of my fellow service members were killed that day. They perished in the Red Sea, and 14 of us survived. And 1 later died, we say, as a result of his injuries. So, yeah, pretty difficult time. Was evacuated back to the U.S. and the military took very good care of me, but for whatever reason, I kind of saw that there were some shortfalls in how service members got taken care of when they left a combat zone. Simple stuff. Like, I didn't have any clothes with me. They evacuated me with the shorts and the T-shirt that I had on under my uniform, and I didn't have anything else until I arrived in Landstuhl, Germany. And I just always remembered that. I remembered being in a hospital in the Middle East when they first evacuated me, and there was a CNN report also, and the CNN report said that U.S. Marine Corps CH-46 helicopters crashed in the Red Sea, killing 4 and injuring 14, and then that was it. And I said, "Those are my 4 friends. That's all that happened was a little snippet on the evening news. Their name would never be spoken." And I felt as though it was my duty at that point to make sure that their names were spoken. So anyways, I came back, I healed up, I went back to 1st Marine Division. I ended up becoming the driver for the Sergeant Major of the 1st Marine Division, then the Assistant Division Commander. So I was the General's driver. And then we got deployed again to Somalia. So I flew all the way across the world to Somalia again, and I drove one of the first Marine Corps Humvees through the gates at the airport in Mogadishu with General Peter Pace, who ended up becoming the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And you want to talk about getting an MBA in leadership. I got to watch the guy who would later become a 4-star general and lead all of our military. I got to see him in action, and that was an incredible experience. So I was in Somalia for about 6 months, and then came back and was selected to go to officer candidate school, went to get a physical, and unfortunately I failed my physical. They gave me the option of staying in or retiring, and I took the retirement. So in 1996, with a 1-year-old daughter, actually 2-year-old at the time, I got out of the military and I moved to Texas. So
Yeah, and we're going to get to some of the other stuff you're doing here. I'm sort of start off with this, but first of all, thank you for your service and your obviously your commitment, and also thank you for sharing this story and this time in your life. I imagine there's a lot of pain, and you can heal and do the things you've been doing, but I can't imagine. And like you see the CNN blurb, and you're probably like, that's it. Like, you're not going to say the name, but tell the story, and they're on to the next thing, right?
Yeah.
When you're going through that moment, I have to imagine that's probably one of the hardest, lowest parts of your life. I mean, what was it like that first week? In some sense, you're probably, I imagine, right? You survived, and you have injuries, but you're like grateful to be alive, and you're also deeply saddened, I imagine, with your friends who didn't make it. I mean, what's it like those first few weeks processing this really traumatic experience you're going through?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I've said this a lot, and it took me 10, 15 years to kind of figure this out. But when you almost lose your life at 25 and you watch friends die in front of you, it immediately changes your perception, because you know that life is short and life is fragile. I mean, obviously, being in the Marine Corps is kind of going to raise your possibility that you could get yourself into a situation like that could get you killed. But I figured out at 25 that this is not a dress rehearsal, that this is going to end someday. And I have tried to live my life to honor the Marine Corps, to honor my family, to honor my buddies that were lost, and to not take the time for granted. So I would say that my career has been highlighted by a lot of risk. I've taken a lot of risk. I just do not play the safe game. You ask anybody who knows me, they'll say the dude does not play the safe game, and
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's going to end in a box. It's just not going to, it's fleeting, man. We're just kind of dust in the wind.
Yeah. And just make the most of it. I think for me, my mom passed away 5.5 years ago from brain cancer. She was in her 50s, sort of out of the blue. You get the diagnosis and, 6 to 12 months to live. And, I spent the last 9 months of her life being able to live near her and just really made the most of it. But after that experience for me, she passed away, I was 28. I had the same thing. I was like, all right, let's go. So we got a dog, bought a house, did an Ironman triathlon, started Quipli, because I was working at these tech companies like Uber, had a good life, it's pretty easy. And I'd always wanted to start a company, and my risk tolerance also went to the extreme, because it's the same thing. Like, what are we waiting for? Time's going by fast. And although I obviously wish my mom was still here and you wish your friends were still here, you can't change that. So what do you do about it? And I always felt like one way to honor those people was to live your life to the fullest, right? Like, and who cares if your company shuts down? Just go to, you know what I mean? Like, obviously I don't want it to, but like, if you look at the extreme downside and you go, okay, well, at the end of the day, 100 years from now, I'm going to be in a box. Who cares? Like, let's go chase the thing you want to do and take risk. And by the way, you're probably going to be successful. And if you're not successful in this one over a long period of time, you will be, right? So I totally resonate with that. I had my own experience 5 or 6 years ago. And that part of why I started Quipli, because I'd always wanted to, was you get this realization you're not going to be here forever, and it's not a dress rehearsal, right? It sounds like you were able to take that experience too and dial your risk adjustment a little bit higher because of the brevity of life, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so when it came time, when the second, I'll put this together.
Yeah.
When the global war on terror started after 9/11, when I moved to Texas, within a year, I had gotten a job helping wounded veterans. I was getting an X-ray at the VA hospital, and there was a magazine for disabled American veterans on the table next to me. I picked it up, and there was a advertisement for veterans who had been wounded and injured to become what they call national service officers. And you'd be posted somewhere in the country helping wounded vets, World War II vets, Korean vets, Vietnam vets and then global war and terror vets with their VA claims and helping their families. And I actually went home and I told my wife at the time, I want to do this. She was very supportive. I flew to Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks later and got the job thanks to a guy named Dennis Nixon, who was a Vietnam vet who lost his leg, who interviewed me in Waco, Texas. So I flew to Washington, got the job, and I was actually posted in Washington, D.C. And so I ended up taking over the DAV office a couple of years later in Roanoke, Virginia. But when the war started after 9/11, DAV was a great organization, gave me incredible training, but I felt like you probably felt with Quipli that I could build a better mousetrap. I felt as though this young generation of veterans did not want service provided the same way as it had been provided before. They weren't going to march into a cold federal building and file a claim and, kind of do things the way that other generations in the past had done them. And I felt as though we could do it better. So this little backpack back here, that's kind of when I left Wounded Warrior Project, they gave me that as the commemoration of first backpack. What I started doing was I started raising money in Roanoke and filling these backpacks with the things that I didn't have in the hospital. Pairs of underwear, socks, zip-up hoodies. I thought about all the things, all the injuries that could happen to people, and I built this backpack around the things that I would have wanted coming across the world. I put Sony Walkman in them and calling cards back then and a shaving kit, kind of a dauber kit with, hygiene products and stuff like that. And I remember going up there, I put 50 of them together. I'd raised $500 and I put 50 of them together and I drove up to Walter Reed from Roanoke, Virginia, and I delivered those first 50 backpacks. And it was an incredible feeling. I got to be at a couple of Purple Heart ceremonies that day. It made me feel great. It was like, the Wounded Warrior Project is logo, if you've seen it, is one wounded guy carrying another guy on his back. And I would tell the guys at their bedside, hey, today you're the guy getting carried. If you do this thing right, tomorrow you're going to be the guy that carries somebody else. And so that was the story. And then several days later, I got a call from the people at Walter Reed, and they said, hey, man, everybody's asking for those backpacks. Can you get more? And that was the beginning of the Wounded Warrior Project. $50 in the basement of my house I put up a network solutions website. I started putting those backpacks for sale for $99 a piece. And within, 5 or 6 years, we had raised, we were raising $28 million a year and helping thousands and thousands of veterans. And today I'm proud to say that I was part of the beginning of Wounded Warrior Project. I was the original CEO. I left there in 2010, turned it over to good hands. And, God said it was time to move on. I'm grateful that I had an opportunity to do it. I had never made a payroll at that point in my life other than Wounded Warrior Project, which was donor dollars. And I wanted to test myself. And so, I didn't want to take a government payroll check or a nonprofit fundraising check. I wanted to, start building businesses. And then so 2010, I ventured off on my own. I retired from Wounded Warrior Project and, I started my entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second. On the Wounded Warrior side, how many people have been impacted? How much money's raised? Do you have the latest, it's been over 20 years at this point. Thousands of people have helped, tens of millions raised, probably 100 million raised, I imagine.
Probably closer to a billion raised.
Billion raised, right? And tens of thousands of people probably helped, right?
Tens of thousands. And of course, my wife, Lisa, she's really, really kind. And she always said, that Wounded Warrior Project really changed the way people think about wounded veterans in this country. An entire generation of Americans got to kind of see the message of Wounded Warrior Project and the message of hope and healing that WWP provided to, those vets, not only the vets themselves, but to their families. We passed, during the time I was there, we passed major legislation that helped wounded vets and their families. So, a real proud time in my life. God put a kid from Seacon, Massachusetts in a position to the helicopter crash was not for naught. I was going to
Yeah.
remember my buddies, and I should say their names, it's, Sergeant Jim Hager and Lance Corporal Rodney Hudson and Corporal Clarence Jenkins and Captain Mark Derrickson. And then
Mm.
Sergeant Pat Collins later lost his life, lost his battle. So, grateful for those guys and always remember them. Wanted to say their names out loud.
Yeah.
Bless their families.
Yeah. But thank you for saying their names. And, I have to imagine they're proud of you for what you've built. And we talked at the show last week, growing up as a son of someone, as a helicopter pilot, my dad was. We knew about the Travis Mania Foundation, Wounded Warrior Project, though. We had golf tournaments every summer raising money for it. And I worked at a golf course and I loved it. And my friends were into it. And when you told me, we talked for 30 minutes, you're like, oh, I started this Wounded Warrior. I'm like, what do you mean you started? You're like, no, you're the guy who started. I was like, I got to talk to you. It's cool because I grew up in the, high school, graduated 2009. Like, I grew up around this when you were the CEO. My question is, right, so you raised over $1 billion, tens of thousands of people helped, and the impact's broader than that, right, with the legislation and the how you've changed how people think about wounded veterans, as you've mentioned. When you're doing those first 50 backpacks and you buy this website for $50, did you ever think it would get to this scale?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, just,
Yeah.
Somebody said to me one time when I was leaving, they said, John, when you were doing that, the kind of similar to the question you asked, when you were doing that, was there a lot of obstacles? And I said, it's funny, dude. I could, look, I'm not the brightest bulb in the circuit. God put me in a position to make a difference. And I just answered the call. I mean, it was during a time of war. It wasn't like it was a bit of a layup, right? I did a really good job in branding. I worked really hard at it. I brought a lot of good people in, and we were very fortunate that I got a telephone call sitting in my little desk. I had an office smaller than the one I'm in right now in Roanoke, Virginia, in a law office. This guy, Jack Altizer, gave me a little space for $500 in his law office. And I got a call, and the guy said, hey, John, I heard about what you're doing. My name is Tony Snow, and I work for Fox News. And I don't know if you know who Tony Snow is. Tony Snow went on to be President Bush's White House spokesperson. He was a long-term Fox News host. And unfortunately, Tony passed away of colon cancer during the time that he was the White House spokesperson. And Tony had given us quite a bit of national exposure and then turned it over. Before he died, he asked Bill O'Reilly if Bill O'Reilly would take on the Wounded Warrior Project cause, and Bill O'Reilly did. And so, we got, very, very blessed, very, very lucky that a lot of incredible Americans came around us. And there's so many more, I mean, that I could talk about, that made a huge difference. It wasn't just me. I just kept knocking on the doors, man, and answered the call. And, that guy told me, I go back to that story, that guy said, did it feel like you were going downstream and nothing could stop you? And I said, I did. I was making decisions that people thought were crazy that just turned into gold. For veterans and their families, there were programs that I was starting and people said, that's never going to work. Veterans are not going to do that. Or donors are not going to do that. And it would work. And for a while there, I thought I was smart, Well, then I became an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Well, I know what that's like. I don't know if we're smart or not. Or yeah, it's interesting. And partly going back to your risk tolerance, and people are like, it may not work. You're like, I think it's going to, but if it doesn't, okay, what I mean? Let's just try it, right? What did you learn about leadership and building an organization? Because you started with yourself, $50 and 50 backpacks, to now, obviously, the organization, I think, is a huge testament to your success building it. It can run without you, right? I think that's actually the ultimate sign of building a great organization as a founder, CEO. Is like, it actually doesn't need to rely on you anymore, which is where it is today. What did you learn about building an organization through that whole process?
Well, and I'll tell you where it really applied in the rental business. When you build, two things: don't give titles out too early, right? So the same people that got you to $1 million are not the same people that are going to get you to $50 million. I know that's hard to hear. Some of them may still be there, but not all of them will. And look, when we got to a certain size, I wasn't the right guy to continue. I am I am much more of a starter and a builder, but I am not a great maintainer. You know, if the organization's 10 years old and you're on your third policy and procedures manual, I ain't the guy for you, right?
Yeah.
I'm all about the beginning. So somebody's going to give a North Star, somebody's got to give a vision, and somebody's got to believe in it. And that's how I am with Contender Equipment Rentals. I believe in Contender Equipment Rentals. I know I wasn't trying to take over the entire veterans world. We're very, very focused. We got in a lot of trouble because we weren't serving Vietnam vets, First Gulf War vets, Korean War vets. We said, we're going to work with this generation of veterans post 9/11. And other generations of vets got upset at us and said, you guys are doing a really good job. Why won't you help us? And I said, because there's a war going on right now. It's the Super Bowl in the world of veterans. And I want the best people on the team helping this generation so that we don't get into a situation like we had with Vietnam vets and other folks who they weren't well served. If we solve the problems at the beginning, then maybe we won't have the same problems that Vietnam vets struggled with. Now, a lot of people don't talk about it, but the Vietnam veteran generation ended up becoming one of the most successful generations in the history of our country. Those guys have been CEOs and have done really, really well. They've gotten some bad press. But I believe that if you stay focused and stay on your path and stay true to your mission, I always said that I put a pill inside of Wounded Warrior Project that said in the bylaws that if they ever took federal dollars, that we could call a meeting of the board to dissolve Wounded Warrior Projects. I made it so that they would never receive federal funds. There are a couple of things inside their constitution and bylaws that made sure that they stayed true to the original mission. No matter how many 3-star generals have taken over since I left, you know. So.
Well, I think there's a lot of lessons in building any organization and the importance of focus, right? And people and patience and building that. And I'm really proud to know you, and I'm sure you're proud for what you've built and the impact you've had. So tell me about, obviously, so we're at the ARA show last week. We're talking about equipment rental. Okay, you finished running the Wounded Warrior Project, hands the baton off, 15 years ago. How did you get into equipment rental and running the business you're doing now?
I wanted to get in the oil business. When I moved from Jacksonville, Florida, where Wounded Warrior Project was, to Houston, Texas, I wanted to get in the oil business. Oil was booming when I left, and I thought that I could stake my claim in oil. And initially, what I did was set up a little company that helped oil field companies employ veterans that were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. I was able to sell that company and did pretty well with it. It was just a small company, but I did pretty well there. And then over the course of the next several years, I went up to Midland and Odessa in the Permian Basin, where most of the drilling in our country is coming from. And I lived out there for 7 or 8 years. Lisa and I maintained our house here in Houston, but I had a corporate apartment up there and actually helped to build some of the man camps that you see like on the, I don't know if you're watching the TV show Landman with Billy Bob Thornton right now, but I helped build some of the man camps that are there. I built one in Pecos, Texas, and Monahans, Texas, and Carlsbad, Texas. And the way I got in the rental business was we were having trouble keeping track of the equipment that we were using when we were building those man camps. And so I got a hold of a telematics company, and we put telematics on our equipment. And when the man camps were built, I was going to be out of a job and actually got recruited by the telematics company to come to work for them and to sell telematics in the oil field. And so I went to work for Pedigree Technologies, great telematics company. They were at the show, and I had always been a hunter at the show. And this time, as a business owner, I was the hunted. It was a totally different experience.
You're getting flagged down. Coming about, hey, you want a free water bottle? Come talk to our booth,
Exactly. It completely shifted. So, but I learned the rental business from the guys that I was selling telematics to. I knew what their pain points were. I knew what their language was, utilization rates, and, kind of what they were looking for on their P&L. I watched some guys that had 20 pieces of equipment when I started with them to having 200, 300, 400 pieces of equipment. So anyways, I wanted to get back to Houston to my wife and to my family, and I said, when I go back, I'm going to start a rental company. And I came back to Houston and bought my first three pieces of equipment from Bobcat new. And that was probably a mistake. If I had to do it over again, I would have bought used to start, but I didn't know any better. I thought I had a really good business plan, which I think I did, but I got very fortunate that maybe we get a little bit into what contenders do. And I got very fortunate that I went to buy a trailer from a rental company that's 2 miles down from us, Reliant Equipment Rental. And it's Russell Sample and Andrea Maxwell run the company. And I was sitting down talking to them and they say, hey, tell us what you're doing. And I said, well, I'd love to be able to buy equipment from you guys, but, I'm sure you don't want to sell to a competitor. And Russell said something to me in July of this year that changed my business. He looked at me and he said, dude, I've been doing this for 30 years. If you're my competition, I'm in the wrong business. You're brand new. Those two have become my mentors in the business. I've bought equipment from them. They've helped me with systems and processes. They've turned me on to, change weight. They've turned me on to a lot of other people. And what I love about rental is that's so different than any other business I've ever been in is the openness of the people that are in the business and the willingness of them to help each other. And what's really interesting is when we came back from the show, I had bought 3 track loaders from them. And the morning I got back from the show, Russell called me on the phone and he said, hey, dude, you got any of those track loaders? He said, I'm completely out. And so it came full circle. He was re-renting from me, the guy he sold them to. So it's the weird thing about the rental business is it's a business where you need to have friends. You can't have enemies. We kind of need each other. Even if they're right down the road, we still kind of need each other to support our businesses.
Yeah, that's always struck me as I don't know. Maybe I'm not old enough to know. Is that the way every industry is? Probably not. But this industry just seems very communal. Like, how do we help each other? Yeah, we may compete on stuff, but like, who cares, right? Like, let's all help each other to win. Like, let's expand the pie, right? Like, let's not fight over the same slice. Let's just make it bigger for everyone. And you saw the numbers, I'm sure, from the show, right? The industry was like 60 billion in 2021. They're saying this year going to be 85, 88 billion potentially. Like, and it's going to cross 100 billion soon, right? In the next few years. Like, there's plenty for everyone to carve up their slice. And I think people generally get that. And if you don't get that, and if you're more selfish, I don't feel like you last very long. It's like the culture of the industry is like, hey, we're going to help each other. We're going to help our customers. And if you're not on board for that, go sell used cars or go do something different, right?
Totally agree. I mean, that's just, I love that about it. There's a guy up Almighty Rentals in Georgetown, Texas, Dan. I met him at the show. I was introduced to him. And he said, I get an email from him, the day I got back from the show, says, hey man, come up for a day or two. There's thousands of things to learn. I'd love to help you. You're like, that doesn't, if you're competing in the oil industry with somebody, they're not doing that stuff for you.
No.
They're not. You're beating each other's heads in if you can. And it's just not that way here,
Yeah. So you started a rental business, Contender Equipment Rentals. One of the things we talked about the show was rent to own and how that's been important for you. If I'm listening to this, I don't know what that is. Tell me what is rent to own and tell me how you're thinking about that, running Contender Equipment Rentals.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people, especially here in Texas, that are unbanked for any number of reasons. It may be immigration status. It may be they don't have good credit. It may be they're just starting up and they can't get equipment financing. And there's a lot of people in the rental industry that tell you shouldn't do rent to own because you are, essentially kicking out your own rental customers. I don't believe that. I think eventually folks who do rental are going to purchase at some point. There's very few companies that have built their entire business around rental. There's some big ones that are able to do it, but the smaller guys, they need to buy equipment from time to time. So I give them the ability to do that at relatively favorable terms. So if I buy a piece of equipment I'll put a margin on it and a small monthly finance charge. And so I'll give you an instance. I buy a piece of equipment for $35,000, a piece of used equipment. I'll sell it for $40,000 or $43,000. I'll put an interest charge on it and I'll do a 14-month, 16-month, 18-month term on it. So, generally it's $2,500 down, $2,500 a month, and I need it I need the 5,000 down in the first month. And then it's still on rent. It's a rental contract, but rent to own. So if at any point they stop paying, I don't have to go through some type of a repo process through the courts. It's just they are tied to a rental contract. So I can go back out, get my machine, and start renting it again or reuse it again. Russell and Andrea at Reliant gave me that idea. They say, hey, buy this used stuff. Make sure that everything in your fleet that's used is for sale and figure out favorable ways to sell it. So we may do some in-house financing this year. We might continue to do rent to own. Maybe bring a bank or two on to help us do some financing for people with better credit profiles. But we'd like to play in the rental or rent to sale theme as well. So.
And that's something that you didn't start with necessarily. Is that something that you see as a core part of your growth plan, is to continue to offer the rent to own program? Because I talk to a lot of rental companies. Not everyone is doing this. I would say a lot of people aren't doing this. Why is this good for the customer, and why is this good for your rental business?
Well, the same guys that have bought track loaders from me are asking me if they can buy excavators from me. So I've put them on a 14 to 16 month contract on a track loader, right? That's helped my cash flow. I built my profit into the first 3 payments, essentially, and locked that profit in. And these guys are getting halfway, 3/4 of the way, and they're looking for the next machine. So I really haven't lost the rental customer. That piece of equipment might be gone out of my rental fleet, but I still got the customer because he's buying something else from me. Now he wants a, E35 excavator, and he wants me to sell him a used E35 excavator. So that model has worked really, really well in my particular market, which is frankly heavily small contractor, 1 to 25 employees, Hispanic generally has a little bit of a distrust of banks. And so we want to be there for our customers. These are hardworking people that are building everything around us. So we want to be there for them. And with all that's going on right now, we're proud of the work that we're doing with that group of people that's helping to build our country.
Yeah, they trust you, and maybe they don't trust the bank. And look, you're solving a need like you did with the Wounded Warrior Project. You found a need in the market, and your customers, the people doing the real work. Right. They're building this country. It's not me talking on the podcast and writing software code, right? It's those are the people doing that. You mentioned earlier, like you made some good decisions, and some mistakes potentially starting off, as everyone does, starting a business. If I'm a listener listening in, and I'm 1 year into my rental business or about to start, what's some advice you give them based on your experience?
A couple of things. New was probably not the way to go. I would look for something that's a year or 2 old and low hour machines, maybe still in their warranty period, 1,200 to 1,800 hours. Kind of like buying a used car. When you buy a new car, the minute you drive it off the lot, you're $8,000 upside down. It's the same way with equipment. So if you're a big company, that depreciation, you're writing it off. The numbers are so big that it's not that big a deal to you. But to a small company, buying something for $15,000 or $20,000 less at the beginning when cash flow is a big deal, and your payments are lower. I bought my first machine. I bought a T66 in closed cab, which was a terrible mistake. I'm never going to buy anything that's not open cab anymore in the rental market. And you're replacing glass every couple of months. So that's a simple mistake that I made. And that thing will cost you $63,000. But then by the time you're done with finance charges and interest and all that stuff, that thing's cost you $75,000. I went and bought 3 used machines, 2 years old, still in their warranty period for $100,000. So it's just a numbers game. So that would be the number one thing that I would do, is try to stack cash early on, because cash flow is going to be, unless you're independently wealthy, cash flow is going to be the thing that keeps you up at night. I would get a good software system. We brought on Quipli. We've been very, very happy with Quipli. I was fortunate that my stepdaughter Grace helped me out early on, and she kind of helped me put the Quipli deal together. She's moved on to greener pastures. She graduated from University of Texas at Austin, and she's got other things on the horizon that work in the rental business, although I'd still love to have her because she spoke Spanish, and as does my wife. And around here, Spanish speakers really help. But getting a good software program that will grow with you. The thing that I loved about Quipli was I knew that with 14 pieces of equipment like I have today, it was big enough. And I know that when I get to 500, 600, 700 pieces of equipment, it's going to be big enough. And I'm not going to be moving out of Quipli because I'm in that position. So I wanted to get something that was, a company that was willing to take me on as a smaller customer and grow with me. And learn my business. And Quipli's done that. And then third, you got to cover your backside. You've got to make sure that you've got good contracts. And we work with, I worked with Nancy and James Wade. They put together a contract for me, both the rent-to-own contract and my rental contract. So those are the three top things that I think are very important. If you got to go to court, I haven't had to. Fortunately, I haven't really had anybody screw me over yet. I had somebody that did some damage to equipment that I haven't been able to collect. But in my contract, it said that I could put a lien on the job. And so sent a letter to the general contractor, and they said, we'll get you paid. I wouldn't even know to do that unless Nancy James Wade had told me, make sure that, you can lien the job if somebody doesn't pay you for damages. So
that's great. Very tactical advice. Buy used, 1 to 2 years old, starting, get a good rental system that you feel comfortable with, and then also get a good rental contract. James Wade comes up on almost every other call, podcast episode. Like just go to them, right? And thank you for being a Quipli user, of course. Thank you for coming on today and sharing your story. This has been one of my favorite episodes. I just love what you built with Wounded Warrior, and obviously love what you're doing on the rental side. A final question I'm interested in. You mentioned the general you worked with earlier, the second trip to Somalia, and how you got a crash course in leadership. My dad's always said some of the best leadership training in the world is through the military. What did you learn about leadership working with him?
So when I worked for him, I was a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps, which is not a big job. I mean, I was a driver to a general. There was a lot of responsibility, but he had to leave after 3 months to take a bigger position. And I went to my bunk inside of this bombed out building, and on my sleeping bag, there was a letter with an envelope with his 1-star general letterhead on it. And I opened it up, and it was a letter thanking the lowest member of his staff for the work that I did for him when I was there. Handwritten. And one of the most valuable lessons I ever learned. Make sure that you're treating the lowest person on your team, pay-wise or position-wise, as well as you're treating the other executives in your company. Maybe better. Because those are the people that are going to help you. Those are the people that are going to grow your business. And I've never forgotten that lesson. I feel like my entire career, I've always tried to be a good trainer, to lift people up. The other guy that I drove, Sergeant Major Smith, he was the Sergeant Major of the 1st Marine Division. And he told me when he came back from Vietnam, there was an old guy that helped him and really poured into him. And he said, why are you pouring so much into me? And he said, because someday you're going to train some other kid, some other Marine that's going to combat, and something that I taught you may save that kid's life. And I've always kind of felt that way in the military and in business, something that invest in your people because they will build your business. And if they don't build your business, they will take your values and they will put them inside other companies.
That's awesome. I mean, that's something I've heard is, our job as the CEO is to build the organization, and the organization builds the business, right? How do you get the right people on the bus, right seat on the bus sort of thing? Jim College, right? And my dad.
We did it. That's what we did at Wounded Warrior Project, by the way. That was a secret recipe. It came out right around that time. And we use good to great. So the good to great model still works incredibly well. If you're building an organization, it still works.
The lessons of leadership are timeless, right? What you learned from that letter in the 1990s is the same as it was in the 1890s and the 1790s. The idea, and here we are 30 plus years later, you're referencing that letter. You remember it. Probably a week later, he forgot he wrote that letter, right? but like for you, that made like a huge impact. It's important.
It's right here in my office.
There you go. Right.
It's right here in my office in a box. I'll never dispose of it.
And I love talking about the future of technology and AI and all this stuff, right? That's all interesting. But like how you treat people is that doesn't change, right? So, anyways, thanks for coming on today, John. It's great to see you in person last week in Vegas at the show. Look forward to seeing you at future shows, and love hearing your story today. Thanks for coming on the podcast, and obviously a lot to be proud of with the Wounded Warrior Project and what you're doing now. It's been awesome to get to know you.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you so much, and thanks for all you're doing at Quipli. And this podcast, I've listened to every episode, so I want you to know
All right.
This has made a really big difference in building my business too.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being a listener as well. Thanks, John.
Thank you. All right. Bye now.
Bye.